Welcome back to my Bible Wheel channel. I previously, in my previous video, I discussed on comparing Deuteronomy 7 with the other chapter 7s, the chapter 7s of the other books, and not only the 7s, but chapter 29s, for example, Jeremiah 29, Isaiah 29, Jeremiah 51, and Isaiah 51. I believe I've done those, but in this study, I'm going to compare Deuteronomy 7 with the seventh book, Judges. And if you compare Deuteronomy 7 with the seventh book, Judges, you're gonna see a lot of things in common, but not necessarily in one place. You're gonna see all throughout the book of Judges how Deuteronomy 7 has failed and fulfilled. You'll notice that how at the beginning of the book, Israel failed to obey the possessing of the land of Canaan. Eventually, as they gave them sons and daughters to marriage, and they served their gods instead of the Lord God of Israel, who delivered them out of Egypt. And eventually they became servants. Uh, they turned against God, and God sent them foreign nations to rule over them, and to the point that they would oppress, and then they would decide to call upon the name of the Lord, and that He would eventually deliver them. But at the same time, I've noticed there were hints of celebrating certain feasts. I would guess that certain deliverances happened on a certain feast days. For example, Joshua had to do with trumpets. No, sorry, Gideon had to do with trumpets. Samson was something else. I believe it was Samson. There were a few of them, but as we'll go, it'll probably come to my mind. So, reading the introduction, both Deuteronomy and the seventh book Judges 1 mention possessing the land or driving out the Canaanites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hittites, Jebusites. There were actually seven mentioned. Uh, the one that wasn't mentioned above was the Girgashites and the Hivites. So let me read Deuteronomy 7:1. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, seven nations greater and mightier than thou. And when you look at Judges 1, you'll notice it's written all over the place. Yeah, it talks about the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites. The Jebusites lived uh, in the Jerusalem area, or that's where Jerusalem or Jebus was. The name Jebus came from, where the B is uh, becomes an R. Jebusites, Jerusalem, and then there are the Hittites and the Amorites. So let me read this to you. so that you can get an idea how it relates to Deuteronomy chapter 7. Now after the death of Joshua it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, Who shall go up for us against the Canaanites first to fight against them? Verse 3, And Judah said unto Simeon his brother, Come up with me into my lot, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with thee into thy lot. So Simeon went with him. And Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they slew them in Bezek 10,000 men. And they found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek, and they fought against him, and they slew the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites that dwelt in the mountain and in the south and in the valley. And Judah went against the Canaanites that dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron before was Kirjat Arba. And they slew Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai. And Judah, this is verse 17, and Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath, and utterly destroyed it. And the name of the city was called Hormah. And the children of Benjamin, this is further in 21, and the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites that inhabited Jerusalem, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem unto this day. So Jerusalem is, I believe, located between the region of Judah and Benjamin. It's on the border, and obviously the first king was Saul. But at the time, Jerusalem wasn't the capital of Israel. But let me tell you, though, that the city of Nob, which was a priestly city, was actually located near Jerusalem, it seems, because when I checked in 1 Samuel 21, that's where they kept the sword of Goliath. That's where David went to get the sword, and that's where Ahimelech was. And Ahimelech was of the lineage of Eli. As I looked into it for your information, and Abiathar was Ahimelech's son. Abiathar, when Saul went to slaughter the priests for not being faithful to him, concerning David who fled away because they didn't show faithfulness. He slaughtered about 80 priests, and Abiathar, being a young boy, fled to find David, and he took an ephod with him to help guide David as he's fleeing away from Saul. This way he could ask for guidance from the Lord. And David actually didn't run all by himself, but he had like 600 men with him. And it's interesting. After he knew that Saul was chasing him, wanted to kill him, he took his family in Bethlehem. He sent them to Moab, the king of Moab, telling the king of Moab to keep them, guard them. And there's a lot of information. Okay, coming back to the subject, verse 26, and the man went into the land of the Hittites and built a city and called the name thereof Luz, which is the name thereof unto this day. Verse 27. Neither did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and her towns, nor Tanakh and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Ibleam and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. And it came to pass when Israel was strong that they put the Canaanites to tribute and did not utterly drive them out. Neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out of the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Nahalol, but the Canaanites dwelt among them and became tributaries. But the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Neither did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Bethshemesh, nor the inhabitants of Bethanath, but he dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Bethshemesh and Bethanath became tributaries unto them. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain, for they would not suffer them to come down to the valley. But the Amorites would dwell in Mount Heres, in Aijalon and Shalbim, yet the hand of the house of Joseph prevailed, so that they became tributaries. And the coast of the Amorites was from the going up to Akrabim, from the rock and upward. So you get an idea as to which nations dwelt where. So if you look at the Canaanites, are pretty much everywhere. Benjamin occupied in the Jerusalem area, and the Jebusites were there. The Danites were more in the north, near modern Lebanon, near the border of modern Lebanon, and the Amorites dwelled in that area. The Perizzites dwelt more in the south. Okay, so we continue with comparing Deuteronomy 7 and with the seventh book, Judges 1, and there's a thing there are several things in common. So deliver and give is the same Hebrew word, into their hands. And as you see in Deuteronomy, these are where deliver, give, or lay is the same Hebrew word. And he shall deliver their kings into thine hand. So in Judges 1, it says, I have delivered the land into his hand. And when you go further down, there's the mentioning of giving Aksa to Caleb, giving Aksa his daughter to wife, and the first one to take, the one who has the victory, leads the victory, is Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And so he gets Aksa, the daughter, to wife. And let's go on to the next. So the next thing is giving or forbidding to give daughters to marriage. The Hebrew word for daughter also means town. Neither shalt thou take marriages with them, make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. And in as as we go further into Judges 1, you'll notice Caleb gave Aksa, his daughter, to wife. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, took it. And there's a mentioning of the towns, which is the same Hebrew word, or I think it's derived from the word daughter. And the next subject is in Judges 2, both Deuteronomy 7 and the 7th book, Judges 2, make mention, make no covenant, league, and destroy their altars. And when you look at Deuteronomy 7, it says, verse 2, and when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Verse 5, but thus shall ye deal with them. You shall destroy their altars, and break down their images, and cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. And when you look at the word altar in Hebrew, it's mizbeach, and is related to sacrifice, zebach, as well as Zayin word. Zayin is the seventh letter, and is related to judges. I'm not sure I can say that these words are found entirely in these areas: Judges, Joel, and Colossians. I mean, study's gonna show. This is my theory, but we'll look more into it as time goes by. Judges 2, verse 2, and you shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. You shall throw down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? And verse 5, and they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto the Lord. So, make no covenant, make no league. To throw down their altars, destroy their altars, it's the same. Throw down and destroy apparently is the same Hebrew word. Let's go on to the next one. The next one is coming back to the subject of deliver or give into their hands. And it's the same text in Deuteronomy 7 and in Judges 2, verse 14. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. And verse 23, therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua. So, this, within every chapter, there's a mentioning of these words: deliver, give, hands. Well, not every chapter, but in several chapters, as well as the other subjects as we talked about. So that's the end of this page. In Deuteronomy 7, continuing the comparison with Judges 2, the 7th book, we come across the word commandments. Commandments is a common word found throughout the Bible. Uh, but it is common between these two as well. And thou shalt therefore keep the commandments and the statutes and the judgments which I command thee this day to do them. And verse 12, wherefore it shall come to pass, if you hearken unto these judgments and keep and do them, that the Lord thy God shall keep unto thee the covenant and mercy which he sware unto thy fathers. And in Judges 2 it says, nevertheless the Lord raised up judges which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them. And yet they would not hearken unto their judges, but they went whoring after other gods, and bowed themselves unto them. They turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, obeying the commandments of the Lord, but they did not so. And when the Lord raised up the judges, then the Lord was with the judge, and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies, and all the days of the judge. For it repented the Lord because of their groanings, by reason of them that oppressed them and vexed them. And verse 19, and it came to pass when the judge was dead, that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, in following other gods to serve them and to bow down unto them. They ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. Here's another subject that becomes common in Deuteronomy, between Deuteronomy 7 and Judges 2, and to serve their gods, and that becoming a snare. And thou shalt consume all the people which the Lord thy God shall deliver thee. Thine eyes shall have no pity upon them, neither shalt thou serve their gods, for that will be a snare unto thee. In Judges 2 it says, wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare unto you. And in Deuteronomy 7, another subject is found is temptation and proof. The great temptations which thine eyes saw, and the signs and the wonders, and the mighty hand and the stretched out arm, whereby the Lord thy God brought thee out. So shall the Lord thy God do unto all the people of whom thou art afraid. And in Judges 2 verse 22, that through them I may prove Israel whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it or not. So temptation and prove is the same Hebrew word. So going on to another subject which is close to the previous page. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. In Judges 2 verse 7, and the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of the Lord that he did for Israel. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Baalim. This is verse 11. Verse 13, and they forsook the Lord and served Baal and Ashtaroth. Verse 14, the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers that spoiled them, and sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers in following other gods to serve them, and to bow down unto them. They cease not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. In verse 20, and the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he said, because that this people has transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not hearkened unto my voice. And I stop it there. So you notice the words that are in common: serve other gods. Now we go on to Judges chapter 3. In Judges chapter 3, the stories are more detailed, particularly the life and story of the judges, of each judge. And let me read you the introduction. Both Deuteronomy 7 and the 7th book, Judges 3, mention the Canaanites, which also means to subdue, and also means merchants or humble. The Amorites, Perizzites, Hittites, Hivites, Jebusites. Deuteronomy 7 mentions they need to cast out these nations, but in Judges 3 it mentions Israel dwelt among these nations. So reading Deuteronomy 7:1 again, when the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And in Judges 3 it says, now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the words of Canaan. Verse 3, namely 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites, and the Sidonians, and the Hivites that dwelled in Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal-Hermon unto the entering of Hamath. Verse 5, the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, and Amorites, and Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites. And verse 30, so Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. So notice, first of all, let me tell you this. If you to let you know that Canaan, and the Hebrew word to subdue, they're related. They're not the same, but they are related. And notice that the Philistines came in the picture at this point. The 5 lords of the Philistines. And then it mentions the Sidonians, which weren't mentioned in the Deuteronomy 7 chapter, in that text. And besides that, so the story develops as the book of Judges go ahead, and that's enough for this page. once again, this time in chapter 3 of the book of Judges, the seventh book, there's the mentioning of deliver or give into their hands. And I'm not going to read Deuteronomy 7 through, but he did mention in verse 24, he shall deliver their kings into thine hand. And when looking at Judges 3 verse 6, and they took their daughters to be their wives and gave their daughters to their sons and served their gods. Verse 10, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel and went out to war, and the Lord delivered Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed against Cushan Rishathaim. And I believe this was Othniel, who was the nephew of Caleb. And in verse 28, which is way after, and he said unto them, follow after me, for the Lord has delivered your enemies, the Moabites, into your hand. This is referring to Ehud. And they went down after him and took the fords of Jordan toward Moab and suffered not a man to pass over. Going on to the next page. And in Deuteronomy 7, it does mention in verse 5, but thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall destroy their altars and break down their images and cut down their groves and burn their graven images with fire. In verse 25, the graven images of their gods shall ye burn with fire. Thou shalt not desire the silver or gold that is on them, nor take it unto thee, lest thou be snared therein, for it is an abomination to the Lord thy God. And going to Judges 3, the graven images is translated as quarries. In Judges 3, verses 19 and 26, but he himself turned again from the quarries that were by Gilgal, and said, I have a secret errand unto thee, O king, who said, keep silence, and all that stood by him went out from him. This is when Ehud went to give an offering a meat offering to the king, and the king was fat, and it showed that that was one thing he desired. That's what he was, more of a festive person who loved to eat and drink, and in verse 26, and Ehud escaped while they tarried, and passed beyond the quarries, and escaped unto Serath. As usual, there's the word judgment mentioned in both Deuteronomy 7 and Judges 3. So I'm going to skip that. Once again, it does mention giving and taking sons or daughters to wife or husband. In Judges 3:6, it says, and they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons to serve and serve their gods. And once again, the word temptation or to prove is mentioned. And Judges 3 mentions in verse 1, now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the words of Canaan. And they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they should hearken unto the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers, by the hand of Moses. And Deuteronomy 7 verse 4, for they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods, so will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you and destroy thee suddenly. And in Judges 3 verses 6 to 8, and they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served Baalim and the groves. Therefore the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. And later on in verse 14, so the children of Israel served Eglon, the king of Moab, 18 years. Once again, the Canaanites is mentioned. The nations and Gentiles are synonymous. This is in Judges 14. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, that reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth of the Gentiles. So God subdued on that day Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the children of Israel. And verse 24, and the hand of the children of Israel prospered and prevailed against Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. And that's the end of this page. So by now, I'm sure you begin to see the pattern, because we moved on to Judges chapter 4, and once again it says, deliver, give into their hands. And it's the same text used in Deuteronomy, and in Judges 4 verse 7 and 14, and I will draw unto thee to the river Kishon Sisera, the captain of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his multitude, and I will deliver him into thine hand. And verse 14, and Deborah said unto Barak, up, for this is the day in which the Lord hath delivered Sisera into thine hand. Is not the Lord gone out before thee? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor, and 10,000 men after him. And the thing that was unique about the Canaanites under Sisera, the captain, and Jabin their king, was that they had chariots of iron. And with each enemy from now on, you'll notice that they had something in particular that was either an advantage or a disadvantage. For example, when you look at Ehud's enemy, Eglon, the king Eglon of Moab, he was a lusty man. He loved to eat, and for that reason he was fat, and the people along with him. And that was the challenge. Actually, the reason it was probably a disadvantage from Moab's side, but because Israel was in bondage and sin, God allowed such people to take over Israel. But on the other hand, in this context, the chariots of iron was that Israel couldn't overcome that. They were too strong for them. and Israel was afraid. They didn't want to fight against the Canaanites. And but at this time, their spirit was raised up, uh, and 10,000 Israelites took down the chariots of iron. The people who fought the chariots of iron, and at the end, uh, Sisera was running away with his feet and hiding. Imagine that. So the page ends. Once again, in Judges 4, it does mention the word judged or judgment. And I'm gonna move on. And the name Canaanites. And this is going into Judges chapter 5. This is continuing the story of Deborah and Barak. We now come to Judges chapter 6. And when you look at Deuteronomy 7, verse 5, but thus shall ye deal with them, you shall destroy their altars and break down their images and cut down their groves and burn their graven images with fire. And the Hebrew word for the name Gideon is related to cut down Gada, and Joash means fire of God. So Gideon meaning cut down. The numerical value for cut down Gada is 3 plus 4 plus 70, and the total is 77. I thought that was an interesting numerical value. And Gideon's story is from Judges chapter 6 to Judges chapter 8. In any case, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Gideon eventually cut down the Baal's grove and everything, and I might as well read it to you. Okay. Judges 6, verse 11, and there came an angel of the Lord and sat under an oak which was in Ophrah, that pertained unto Joash the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon threshed wheat by the winepress to hide it from the Midianites. And verse 13, and Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, did not the Lord bring us from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. And verse 19, and Gideon went in and made ready a kid and unleavened cakes of an ephah of flour. The flesh he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot and brought it unto him under the oak and presented it. Verse 22, and when Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord, Gideon said, Alas, O Lord God, for because I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. Verse 24, then Gideon built an altar there unto the Lord and called it Jehovah Shalom. Unto this day it is yet in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had said unto him, and so it was because he feared his father's household and the men of the city that he could not do it by day, that he did it by night. Verse 29, and they said one to another, who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon the son of Joash hath done this thing. And verse 34, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet, and Abiezer was gathered after him. And verse 36, and Gideon said unto God, if thou wilt save Israel by mine hand, as thou hast said. And the sentence is cut short. Verse 39, and Gideon said unto God, let not thine anger be hot against me, but I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with fleece. Let it now be dry upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. Moving on to the next page, we have it continues with Judges chapter 6, and the focus is on this 5. But thus shall ye deal with them: you shall destroy their altars, and break down their images, and cut down their groves, and burn their images with fire. So that's what eventually Gideon did. The Hebrew word for the name Gideon is related to cut down, Gada, and Joash means fire of God. So, going to Judges 6, verse 24-25, then Gideon built an altar there unto the Lord, and called it Jehovah Shalom. Unto this day it is yet in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father hath, and cut down the grove that is by it. And verse 26, and build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock, in the ordered place, and take the second bullock, and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down, and the grove was cut down that was by it, and the second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. Verse 30, the men of the city said unto Joash, bring down thy son, that he may die, because he has cast down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the grove that was by it. And Joash said unto all that stood against him, will ye plead for Baal? Will ye save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death, whilst it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. 32. Therefore on that day he called him Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal plead against him, because he had cut down his altar, thrown down his altar, sorry. Moving on. Once again, the theme of deliver or give into their hands is mentioned. As you read in verse 1, and the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian 7 years. And I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of all that oppressed you, and drave them out from before you, and gave you their land. Verse 13. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all these miracles which our father told us of, saying, Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. And here we come to the theme of great, increase, multiply, many, and grasshoppers. What do they have in common? How is Deuteronomy 7 related to the seventh book, Judges? And it shows that God will cast out many nations from before Israel, nations that are greater, and it mentions the Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any people, for you were the fewest of all the people. And later on, he says that he's going to bless thee and multiply thee in the increase of thy kind, mentioning that. And these nations are more than I, how can I dispossess them? And at the end, lest the beast of the field increase upon thee. So when you look at the meaning of the name more multitude, the word more or multitude is rob, and it's related to grasshoppers, locusts, arbe. So in Judges 6, in verse 5, for they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came up as grasshoppers for multitude, for both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. Okay, so the next page, as you'll see, it goes back to the Lord's anger being kindled against, and almost every chapter there's a repetition of this and other things that you notice. So okay, let me read to you verse 4. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. And at this point, Gideon is actually praying, saying that verse 39, and Gideon said unto God, Let not thine anger be hot against me, and I will speak but this once. Let me prove, I pray thee, but this once with the fleece. Let it now be dry only upon the fleece, and upon all the ground let there be dew. We come back to the theme of delivering or giving into their hands. And this is Deuteronomy 7 and Judges 7. And Judges 7, it says, verse 2, And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, Mine own hand has saved me. And the Lord said unto Gideon, By the 300 men that left will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go, every man to his place. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. And verses 14 to 16, and his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, and the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand, with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. So in this circumstance, God, seeing that the Midianites are many, he wanted his own glory. God is gonna be glorified in what he does in delivering the enemy, delivering Israel against their enemies. And what I mean is delivering Israel from their enemies. And he did that by reducing the numbers, and he sent a lot of people, Gideon sent a lot of people home, and by 300 men they got the victory. And that's the thing with every story in the book of Judges. It has to do with God getting the glory somehow, you know. This goes back to Deuteronomy 7, saying that I'm not going to give you the victory because you were many, but because you're few, and God wants the glory. And that's the subject for this following page. As you'll see, there's a repetition of the theme. Great, increase, multiply, many grasshoppers. And you'll see, I read Deuteronomy 7 before, but it does say, look at Deuteronomy 7 verse 7, the Lord did not set his love upon you, nor choose you, because you were more in number than any people, for you were the fewest of all people. And Judges 7:2, and the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many, bring them down to the water, and I will try for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee, and whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. And verse 12, and the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside for multitude. Once again, the theme of breaking down or cutting down, breaking down their images, cutting down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire is repeated in Judges 7. Let me read to you the introduction, though. Both Deuteronomy 7 and the seventh book, Judges, mentioned Gideon, which comes from the Hebrew word to cut down, and Joash, which means the Lord's fire. Well, there was no image being cut down at this point, but it's the name that the names that I've highlighted in this case. Once again, Canaanites and subdued are highlighted. I'm gonna move on. Once again, it mentions deliver and give into their hands. This is in Judges 8. So this is where it's important, and you'll see, I'll read this to you. Verse 24, Deuteronomy 7 verse 24, and he shall deliver their kings into thine hand, and thou shalt destroy their name from under heaven. There shall no man be able to stand before thee until thou hast destroyed them. So in Judges 8 it says, verse 3, God hath delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeeb. And what was I able to do in comparison of you? Their anger was abated towards him when he said that. And verse 5, and he said unto the men of Succoth, give, I pray you, some loaves of bread unto the people that follow me, for they be faint, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian. And what is interesting is that they actually deny Gideon and his men, the 300 men, bread. And Gideon and his 300 men bread. So there weren't only 301 men chasing the kings of Midian. There were the Midianites in general, but especially the kings. But at this point, they were hungry, they were faint as well. And this shows that it was God's will that they should be handed over. Zebah and Zalmunna should be handed over to the Israelites. And verse 6, and the princes of Succoth said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand, that we should give bread unto thine army? And Gideon said, therefore, when the Lord hath delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into mine hand, then I will deliver your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. And verse 15, and he came unto the men of Succoth and said, behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, with whom ye did upbraid me, saying, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hands, that we should give bread unto thy men that are weary? As I was mentioning, the 300 men plus Gideon, altogether the numerical value would be 301. It reminded me, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but 301 is actually the numerical value of the word for fire in Hebrew, Esh, meaning Aleph is 1 and Shin is 300. I don't know if that's a coincidence. Once again, we come to the theme of great increase, multiply many grasshoppers, and at this point, Gideon became so prosperous that he had many wives, and to the point that Israel wanted to make him king, and he refused that, but he did have many wives. And you'll notice in the following chapter what happened, because Abimelech was the son of Gideon, the son of Jerubbaal, but through a concubine. And so I'll read this to you. And Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives. Eventually, Abimelech, who was his concubine, killed all his sons. So that's it for this page.